March 13th, 1962. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. 2300 hours. Sub-basement, E-ring. The air inside the tactical conference room of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was not merely stale, it was toxic. It hung heavy with the acrid blue haze of expensive cigars, the metallic tang of cold coffee, and the suffocating weight of treason. This was a room that did not appear on the standard blueprints of the Pentagon. It was soundproofed, copper-shielded against electronic eavesdropping, and buried so deep beneath the earth that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like the breathing of a dying giant. General Lyman Lemnitzer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood at the head of the massive mahogany table. He was a man carved from the granite of the old world, hard, unyielding, and completely devoid of doubt. His uniform was impeccable, the rows of ribbons on his chest gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, but his face was a mask of exhaustion and rage. He paced back and forth, the heels of his polished boots clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor, a sound that echoed like a ticking clock in the silence of the room. Around the table sat the most powerful men in the United States military. General Curtis LeMay of the Air Force, a man who had burned Japanese cities to ash without blinking. Admiral George Anderson of the Navy, whose fleets controlled the oceans. General Decker of the Army. They were not politicians, they were warriors. And right now, they were warriors without a war, caged animals watching their enemy laugh at them from 90 miles away.
Lemnitzer stopped pacing. He turned to the map of the Caribbean pinned to the wall. Cuba was circled in red grease pencil. It looked like a wound on the flank of America. "Gentlemen," Lemnitzer began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the chest. "We are failing. We're sitting here holding the keys to the greatest arsenal in human history, and we are letting a bearded communist in jungle fatigues dictate the future of the Western Hemisphere." He slammed his hand onto the table, causing the heavy crystal water pitchers to rattle. "Castro is mocking us. The Soviets are moving in. And what does the White House do? Diplomacy, containment, sanctions." He spat the word sanctions as if it were a piece of rotten meat. "Kennedy is a boy playing a man's game. He doesn't understand that you cannot negotiate with a cancer. You cut it out. You burn it out." General LeMay shifted in his chair, the leather creaking loudly. He took a long drag from his cigar, the cherry glowing bright red in the dim light. "We all know the problem, Lyman," LeMay growled, smoke pouring from his mouth like a dragon. "We proposed the airstrikes. We proposed the invasion. The president shot them down. He's afraid of public opinion. He's afraid of looking like the aggressor at the UN. He needs a reason to fight that looks clean."
"A reason," Lemnitzer repeated softly. A cold, dangerous smile touched his lips. He walked over to the wall safe, a heavy steel monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. He spun the combination dial with precise, practiced movements. Left, right, left. Click. The heavy door swung open on silent hinges. From the depths of the safe, Lemnitzer pulled a single, thick file folder. It was plain manila, unassuming except for the stamps running diagonally across the cover in red ink. Top secret, special handling, no fern. It was a document that was never meant to see the light of day. A document that, if discovered, would see every man in this room court-martialed for high treason. "We have spent the last 3 months analyzing the psychological profile of the American public," Lemnitzer said, walking back to the table and placing the folder in the center. It landed with a heavy thud. "We have analyzed what makes them angry, what makes them afraid, what makes them demand blood.
Lemnitzer turned the first page of the document. The text was typed on a standard typewriter, clean and bureaucratic, discussing murder as if it were logistics supply chain. Appendix A, Incidents at Guantanamo Bay. We start small, Lemnitzer explained. We have the base at Gitmo. It is isolated, vulnerable. We will utilize our own black ops teams, men who can keep their mouths shut, to infiltrate the perimeter from the outside. They will be dressed as Cuban militia. He ran his finger down the list of proposed actions. We will start fires. We will burn the aircraft fuel depots. We will sabotage the ammunition dumps. We will create chaos, and then we will lob mortar shells into the base from the surrounding hills. Not enough to destroy the base, but enough to cause casualties. Casualties? Anderson asked. You mean our own Marines? A few wounded, maybe a few dead. It is the price of admission. We need photos of American boys bleeding on American soil. The press will eat it up. Castro attacks Guantanamo. It writes itself.
But fires and mortars are not enough, LeMay interrupted. That's a skirmish. That's not a war. We need something that hits the gut, something that makes the average Joe in Kansas choke on his breakfast. Agreed, Lemnitzer said. He turned the page. That is why we have option 2, remember the Maine. He pointed to a diagram of a U.S. Navy destroyer. We take a ship, not a patrol boat, a real warship. We rig it with explosives in the bilge and the magazine. We sail it into the harbor, and when it is in full view of the Cuban coastline, we blow it up. The room was silent. The generals looked at each other. They were discussing sinking a United States naval vessel, killing hundreds of sailors, drowning them in oil and fire. We blame Cuban mines, Lemnitzer continued, his voice steady, or a torpedo boat attack. We will have survivors, actors who will testify they saw Cuban markings. We will conduct a mock funeral for the victims. The outrage will be absolute.
It's risky, Anderson murmured. If the truth gets out. The truth is what we say it is, Lemnitzer snapped. But if you think sinking a ship is too risky, look at option 3. This one brings the war to the mainland, to the civilians. Lemnitzer looked up, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying fanaticism. We simulate a campaign of Cuban terror in Miami and Washington. Simulate? We hire snipers, Lemnitzer said. We target refugees. We target Americans on the street. We plant bombs in shopping centers. Real bombs. We need real shrapnel, real blood on the pavement. We arrest Cuban agents, our own people, and release pre-written confessions to the newspapers. We make every American mother afraid to let her child go to school. He was talking about terrorism. State-sponsored terrorism against its own population, and he was discussing it with the calmness of a man ordering lunch.
And the masterpiece, Lemnitzer said, reaching the final section of the document. Operation Dirty Trick, the hijacking scenario. This was the most complex and diabolical part of the plan. It involved the United States Air Force and the CIA working in perfect synchronization to fool the entire world. We charter a civilian airliner, a holiday flight, college students, tourists, innocent people. We create a duplicate aircraft, an empty drone painted to look exactly like the civilian plane. We load the passengers at Miami International. The plane takes off. It flies south, but over a secure zone near Eglin Air Force Base, the pilot drops below radar. He lands the plane at a black site. We offload the passengers. And what happens to them? LeMay asked. Lemnitzer didn't answer. The implication hung in the air. They would disappear. Collateral damage.
At the exact moment the real plane lands, Lemnitzer continued,
The drone aircraft takes off from the base. It climbs to the assigned altitude. It picks up the flight path. To the radar operators in Miami, it looks like the same plane. It flies toward Cuba. Over international waters, the drone begins to transmit distress signals. Mayday! Mayday! We are under attack by Cuban MiGs. We record these screams beforehand. We play them over the radio for the world to hear. And then, Lemnitzer made a fist and opened it slowly, mimicking an explosion. We detonate the drone remotely. The wreckage falls into the sea. We blame Castro for shooting down a plane full of American kids. It'll be the greatest tragedy since the Lusitania. The world will beg us to invade. The general sat back. The audacity of the plan was staggering. It was evil, yes, but it was brilliant. It was a machine designed to generate war. "Will Kennedy sign it?" Anderson asked. "He's soft." "He has no choice," Lemnitzer said, closing the file. "We will present this not as a suggestion, but as a necessity. We will tell him that this is the only way to secure the nation. We will corner him in the Oval Office. He is a politician. He understands power. And we are the power." Lemnitzer picked up a pen. He signed the cover page of Operation Northwoods. He passed it to LeMay. LeMay signed, Anderson signed, Decker signed. Within 5 minutes, the entire leadership of the United States military had agreed to wage war on their own citizens. "Prepare your best suit, gentlemen," Lemnitzer said, standing up. "Tomorrow we go to the White House. Tomorrow we change history."
March 16th, 1962. The White House, the Oval Office, 10 a.m. The sun was shining through the bulletproof glass of the Oval Office windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a picture of peace, but the mood inside the room was anything but peaceful. President John F. Kennedy sat in his rocking chair, a grimace of pain tightening his jaw. His back was in agony, but he refused to show weakness. Standing before the resolute desk was General Lemnitzer. The general stood at rigid attention, his uniform pressed, his medals gleaming, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying certainty. "Mr. President," Lemnitzer began, his voice booming in the quiet room, "the Joint Chiefs have finalized the strategy for Cuba. We believe this is the only path forward, the only way to guarantee public support for a full-scale invasion." He placed the Northwoods folder on the desk. It landed with a heavy, dull thud, like a coffin lid closing. Kennedy picked up the folder. He opened it slowly. He respected Lemnitzer as a soldier, but he feared him as a zealot. Kennedy began to read. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. Tick, tock, tick, tock. As Kennedy turned the pages, his expression shifted. The polite interest faded. His brow furrowed. He read the section on blowing up the ammo dump at Guantanamo. He read the proposal to sink a U.S. ship. He stopped. He looked up at Lemnitzer's and back down at the paper, as if he couldn't believe the words were topped in English. He read the section about the drone aircraft and the fake funeral for American college students. Kennedy's knuckles turned white as he gripped the paper. The silence in the room stretched until it was almost unbearable. "General," Kennedy said finally. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of the office. "Is this a theoretical exercise? A war game scenario?" "No, Mr. President," Lemnitzer replied, puffing out his chest. "This is an actionable plan. We have the assets in place. We can begin the Miami phase within 48 hours. We have snipers ready. We have the explosives." Kennedy stood up. He ignored the pain in his back. He walked around the desk and stood face to face with the general. "You have snipers ready?
To shoot whom, General? Cuban soldiers? To shoot random targets, sir, Lemnitzer said, not blinking. Civilians, refugees. It creates terror. Terror creates unity.
You are insane, Kennedy spat the words out. You are talking about terrorism. You are talking about treason. You want me to sign a death warrant for American citizens just so you can play with your tanks in Havana?
We're fighting for the survival of the West, Lemnitzer shouted, losing his composure. You are too soft, Mr. President. You don't understand the enemy. The Soviets wouldn't hesitate. Castro wouldn't hesitate. Why should we tie our hands with morality when they have none? Because we are the United States of America, Kennedy roared, slamming his hand on the desk. We do not shoot our own people. We do not blow up our own ships. That is what the Nazis did. That is what Stalin does, not us.
Lemnitzer's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He looked at the young president with pure contempt. In his mind, Kennedy was a coward who didn't have the stomach for the hard choices. "You are making a mistake," Lemnitzer growled. "If we do not act, history will judge you." "Let history judge me," Kennedy said, his voice turning cold as ice. "But it will not judge me for murdering children on a drone plane. Take this file, General. Take it and get out of my office. And if I ever hear a whisper of this plan being activated, if one bomb goes off in Miami, I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth breaking rocks." Kennedy pointed to the door. "Dismissed."
Lemnitzer grabbed the Northwoods file. He didn't salute. He turned on his heel and marched out of the Oval Office. Kennedy watched him go. He slumped back into his chair, rubbing his temples. He felt sick. He realized in that moment that the biggest threat to America wasn't in Moscow or Cuba. It was across the river, in the Pentagon. "God help us," Kennedy whispered to the empty room. "They want war so badly they can taste it." A few months later, Kennedy denied Lemnitzer a second term as chairman. He shipped him off to Europe. But he couldn't fire them all. The rot was too deep.
The Operation Northwoods document did not die. It was returned to the Pentagon. It was stamped top secret, eyes only. It was placed in a vault deep underground, buried under tons of concrete and bureaucracy. It sat there in the dark while the world changed. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas a year later. Some say the war machine he tried to stop finally caught up with him. Vietnam exploded, the Cold War dragged on, and through it all, the blueprint for false flag terrorism lay waiting, a loaded gun in the drawer of the American government.
May 1997. The John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Review Board. 35 years later, a researcher named John Tunheim was sifting through millions of pages of declassified documents. He was looking for clues about Oswald. Instead, he found a folder that had nothing to do with Dallas. He opened it. Justification for U.S. military intervention in Cuba. He read the first paragraph. He stopped. He read it again. His blood ran cold. He realized he was holding proof, undeniable signed proof, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had conspired to launch terror attacks against U.S. citizens.
The document was released to the public in 1998. The media picked it up. ABC News ran a segment. The New York Times printed the details. For a moment, the American public stared into the abyss of their own government's morality. But there were no trials. Lemnitzer was dead. The others were gone. The Pentagon issued a bland statement saying these were merely concepts that were never implemented. Concepts, ideas, just words on paper.
What Operation Northwoods is more than a history lesson. It is a warning. It proves that false flag operations are not the fantasies of conspiracy theorists. They are real options discussed in real boardrooms by men wearing real medals. If they were willing to blow up a ship and shoot college students in 1962 to start a war, what are they willing to do today? Look at the news, look at the headlines, and ask yourself, is what you are seeing real, or is it another Operation Northwoods waiting to be declassified in 40 years? This is Declassified. Before it's too late, question the narrative.